Hey, why is she holding a ghost?
My 5-year-old daughter, who had come to visit my brother's wife just after she gave birth, said this while curiously staring at the baby sleeping in my sister-in-law's arms.
Isn't that Grandma over there?
At my daughter's next words, my sister-in-law let out a silent scream. She quickly tossed the baby into the crib, pulled the blanket over herself, and started trembling uncontrollably. I was shocked and confused by her terrified reaction. And later, a shocking truth was revealed. Emma, my daughter, had been saying strange things since she was old enough to talk. Even when she was playing with dolls by herself, she would say,
I was playing with my big sister.
Or she would point at an empty spot on the street and ask,
Why isn't that person using an umbrella when it's raining?
I began to wonder if she had some kind of sixth sense, but since I'm terrified of ghosts and scary stories, I just brushed it off as her having an imaginary friend, just like many children do. Because of that, I never mentioned it to my brother. My brother, who is 2 years older than me, is a gentle and easygoing person. We used to play games and watch movies together when we were kids. He got married shortly after I did, tying the knot with his girlfriend at the time. However, Amy, his wife, turned out to be rather selfish and often caused trouble for those around her. She was the one who held the reins in their household, but I thought it suited my laid-back brother just fine, so I was happy for them. They also ended up living with my mom at our family home, and my brother, who travels a lot for work, was very grateful for. Some time after my brother got married, I became pregnant with our long-awaited second child. I'm pregnant, John.
Congratulations, Nancy! That means Emma's going to be a big sister.
Thank you. I'm so happy. When I shared the news with my brother, he was overjoyed. But that wasn't all.
Actually, Amy's pregnant too. Your child and ours will be in the same grade.
To my surprise, my sister-in-law was also expecting. Wow! What an amazing coincidence. I was thrilled by the news, and my brother and I started chatting excitedly about the future. Things like the baby's gender, possible names, and daycare plans. I felt so happy thinking about the child I would soon bring into the world. However, that peaceful time didn't last long before tragedy struck. I was suddenly hit with severe abdominal pain. My husband rushed me to the hospital, but by the time we arrived, it was too late. The baby inside me had already passed away. After spending hours crying, I forced myself to make the difficult call to tell my mom, who had been so happy about my pregnancy. But no matter how many times I called, my mother's phone wouldn't connect. Growing increasingly anxious, I decided to reach out to my sister-in-law, who lived with her. Hello, Amy? It's been a while. I just have something I need to check.
What is it?
Amy's voice was curt, filled with irritation. I've been trying to call my mom's cell, but it's not connecting at all. Also, did you guys cancel the landline? I got a message saying it was disconnected.
Yeah, there were too many telemarketers, so we got rid of it.
Is something wrong with my mom? I'm worried because I can't reach her on her cell either.
She said it broke. She'll get a new one eventually.
Amy quickly cut me off, then added,
So, what do you need? I can pass along a message.
It was clear she wanted to end the call as soon as possible. So, I decided to tell my sister-in-law about the miscarriage. To my shock, she responded with a sneer and threw some appalling words at me.
Were you still working your part-time job?
standing for hours on end, right? You were just being careless, weren't you? So irresponsible.
What?
I mean, you already have one child, so it's not like you should be that sad. There's no point in dwelling on it. You can just have another one.
I was stunned by Amy's insensitivity. I couldn't understand how she could be so cruel, rubbing salt into my wounds while I was in the depths of grief over losing the life inside me. She continued,
If you miscarried that quickly, the baby might have been weak anyway. Unlike you, I take good care of my body.
But by then, I couldn't hear anything she was saying anymore. I simply said, I have to go, and hung up the phone. Yet, the tears kept flowing, and I couldn't stop them. It was the first time I had ever felt such overwhelming sadness and despair. I lay on the couch and cried until my husband came home, unable to do anything else. Although I was somewhat worried about not being able to reach my mom, I avoided visiting my parents' house for nearly 6 months because I couldn't bear the thought of facing Amy after that call. Then, one evening, just after 10 p.m., I received a phone call from my brother. It was unusual for him to call at that hour, so I answered, and heard his voice trembling with tears.
Nancy, Mom collapsed from heat stroke. She didn't make it.
No, that can't be. Mom. I was so shocked that everything went black before my eyes. Apparently, my sister-in-law had returned home that evening and found my mother collapsed in the yard. She called an ambulance, but Mom wasn't breathing, and by the time my brother arrived at the hospital from his business trip, she was already gone. They said she was found near the shed in the yard, perhaps searching for something when the heat got to her. It was a tragic accident in the height of summer. Once again, I was plunged into deep sorrow. However, there was no time to dwell on our grief. My brother and I were overwhelmed with the preparations for the funeral. We had to notify the authorities, contact our relatives and my mother's friends, arrange the funeral, and prepare for the wake. We were constantly on the move, but my sister-in-law showed no intention of helping. I was concerned about her health due to the pregnancy, but she didn't seem to be suffering from severe morning sickness. If you have a moment, Amy. I hesitantly asked her for help, but she quickly looked away.
I'm not good with these kinds of things. I'll just go rest somewhere quiet.
With that, she hurried off to the waiting room. When the wake began, my brother and I were busy attending to the relatives and friends who had come to pay their respects. We greeted each guest, sharing stories and memories of our mother.
So early, it's truly heartbreaking. Don't let it get you down.
Hearing such kind words from my mother's friends and acquaintances, I felt proud of her for the way she had valued her relationships with others. Although my frustration with Amy's lack of involvement continued to grow, I was too consumed by the sadness of losing my mother and the demands of the funeral to dwell on it. After the funeral finally ended, my brother and I were able to take a moment to breathe.
Nancy, thank you so much. I'm sure Mom feels relieved now.
Yeah. You did great too, John. It was tough. At that moment, I suppressed my frustrations with Amy's indifferent behavior, and together with my brother, I cried as we remembered our mother. Sometime later, as we began organizing the condolence money, Amy suddenly appeared out of nowhere and approached us. I wondered if she had finally decided to help, but that thought was short-lived as she said something unbelievable.
Hey, shouldn't I be the one to keep this?
What do you mean by that? I asked, unable to comprehend her words at first.
Well, I lived with your mother and took care of her, so I should be the one to get the condolence money.
My brother frowned and looked at her in disbelief. Amy, what are you talking about? But she didn't seem bothered by our reactions.
I was the one closest to her and had the hardest time, so it's only fair, right?
My brother and I were shocked by her unreasonable demand. Now is the time to remember Mom, so please don't talk about such things, I said.
Yeah, enough is enough.
My brother added. Although my sister-in-law was scolded by both of us, she nonchalantly changed the subject.
By the way, I heard Emma's birth gift was $1,000. My husband told me. I'd like that much too.
What?
And if you're not using Emma's old baby items anymore, could you give them to me? It would save us some money.
My husband and I were taken aback by her audacity.
Hold on. This isn't the time to be talking about this.
My husband interjected, trying to bring some sense to the situation.
But we're going to need to prepare for the baby.
Amy, please stop. Now isn't the time. We can discuss this later.
The cold tone in my brother's voice, something I wasn't used to hearing, chilled the room, and even Amy fell silent. Seasons passed, and my brother eventually contacted me to share the news that their baby had been born safely. He was on a business trip and couldn't visit right away, so he asked if I could go in his place. Despite all the hurtful things Amy had said and done, which still lingered in my mind, I decided to put it aside for the sake of the occasion and took my daughter to the hospital.
Welcome, Nancy, Emma.
When we entered the room, Amy was smiling, holding her newborn baby. Seeing her there, I almost forgot about the hurtful words from my miscarriage and the frustrations during the funeral. I felt genuinely happy in that moment. But then, it happened.
Hey, Amy, why are you holding a ghost?
My daughter tilted her head curiously and pointed at Amy. Neither Amy nor I understood what she meant and were momentarily stunned.
Isn't that Grandma?
When my daughter continued, Amy let out a silent scream, throwing the baby into the bassinet. Amy turned pale, trembling uncontrollably. Are you okay? What's wrong? I hurried over, placing a hand on her shoulder, but she shoved it away and pulled the blanket over herself.
Please, just leave.
Her voice was barely audible as she buried herself under the blanket, refusing to respond to anything else I asked. After leaving the hospital, I walked in silence, worried about my sister-in-law's strange behavior. Then, my daughter started to say something even more unbelievable. Although I was shocked, several things came to mind that made me think, could she be telling the truth? Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to visit my parents' house under the pretext of tidying up. Although I had been avoiding the house due to the grief of my miscarriage and my mother's accident, I knew I couldn't put this off any longer. When I told my brother that I wanted to sort through our mother's belongings, he said he was too busy with work to do it himself, so I took the initiative. With Amy still in the hospital, this was my chance. I used the key I had to enter the house and began opening doors and closets, slowly sorting through everything. As I was going through my mother's belongings, memories came flooding back. When I looked up at the top shelf of the closet, I noticed some cardboard boxes haphazardly stored there. Curious, I pulled one down and opened it. What? Why are these here? Inside, I found surveillance cameras. 5 of them. The number was unsettling, especially for a household. I noticed that each camera still had an SD card inside, so I decided to take them home to review the footage. I then went into my mother's room and opened the drawer of her desk. Inside, I found an old journal. My mother's diary? I opened it and found entries about Emma's growth, the day my brother brought Amy home, the death of my father from illness 20 years ago, and even some recipes. The entries were filled with warm memories, and I couldn't help but cry. Mom, you were such a kind and strong person. However, as I continued turning the pages, my attention was caught by some illustrations drawn in the margins. This drawing. It looks familiar. It resembled an illustration I had created with my mother when I was a child. As I traced back my distant memories, I realized a terrifying truth. On the day of my mother's first death anniversary, we gathered at the family home. Thank you all for being here today, I said, after exchanging memories of my mother with my relatives. Once everyone had settled, I pulled out a notebook. This is my mother's diary. Hidden within it is a message, I announced. Among the surprised relatives, Amy's eyes widened the most.
What? I've seen that diary, and there's nothing special in it.
She scoffed, dismissing the notion. But I calmly continued. Everyone, please take a look at the illustrations drawn in the margins of this diary. These are part of a code my mother and I created when I was a child. The relatives leaned in with curiosity. When you connect the first letters of the words in these illustrations, it spells out, "Look behind the dresser," I revealed. Amy's expression shifted to one of confusion. When I actually looked behind the dresser, I found a letter that my mother had hidden there. As the relatives expressed their shock, Amy turned pale. This letter describes how Amy made me do all the housework while keeping a constant watch on our mother to ensure she didn't slack off, I said, holding up the letter for everyone to see. The room filled with uneasy murmurs as the relatives began to understand the gravity of the situation. Despite her growing anxiety, Amy desperately tried to explain herself.
That's just your mother's delusion. It's all lies to make me look bad. Maybe you forged it yourself.
Amy blurted out, her voice shaking. No, this is my mother's handwriting. The handwriting matches her diary entries, and the letter includes specific dates and detailed situations, making it very credible, I countered calmly. There were many other hiding spots indicated by the illustrations, and we found more letters from my mother in various places around the house. Under the mortar in the kitchen, between large plates, inside a box of canned goods, in the rag drawer, and even in the back of the shoe cabinet. If Amy had been doing the cooking and cleaning, she would have noticed these letters. The fact that she hadn't found them supports the truth of what my mother wrote. The other letters revealed even more, how Amy had stolen my mother's pension, forced all the housework onto her, and even had an affair. She had also cut off my mother's means of communication to keep this from my brother and me, and had installed surveillance cameras throughout the house, in the yard, and at the entrance to ensure that my mother couldn't leave the house alone.
Enough of this. It's all lies. What proof do you have that any of this is true?
Amy shouted, her face flushed with anger. At that moment, my daughter stepped forward and stood in front of her.
Grandma says Amy locked her up. She told me at the hospital too.
My daughter said softly.
Stop lying!
Amy screamed, her voice filled with rage, as she lashed out at my daughter. But I stepped in front of her, shielding my child. Emma is not lying. Watch this video, I said, pulling out the SD card I found in the surveillance camera and playing the footage on my laptop. The content of the video was shocking. It showed my mother and Amy going to the storage shed to retrieve something. As my mother unlocked the door and began to enter, Amy suddenly shoved her inside. She then snatched the key, locked the door, and was clearly seen leaving the premises, glancing around nervously to ensure no one was watching. Our family home is in a rural area, with the nearest neighbors at some distance. It was also the height of summer, so few people would have been outside. Amy must have planned the whole incident, knowing the likelihood of being seen was minimal. Why would you do something like this? I asked, horrified. Amy muttered under her breath, her voice filled with resentment.
She always nagged me whenever I came home late and insisted I help with the housework.
Her tone grew more agitated, and suddenly she raised her voice.
And then, somehow, she found out about my affair and threatened to tell my husband. I just wanted to teach her a lesson. That's all!
I was stunned by Amy's selfishness and the flippant way she tried to justify her actions. This is the truth about how my mother died, I declared, as a heavy silence fell over the room. Everyone present was at a loss for words. Amy, with a tone of false bravado, said,
I've confessed everything now, so just let it go, okay? The dead can't come back, so let's move on.
Don't be ridiculous, I shouted, my voice trembling with rage. I will never forgive you. You're going to spend the rest of your life behind bars.
What? Wait, you're going to call the police. No, please, don't do this.
Amy cried out, collapsing to the floor as she clung desperately to my legs, sobbing. But I felt no sympathy for her. You'll have to live with the weight of your crimes, I said coldly, turning away as Amy slumped in despair. After that, my sister-in-law was arrested and spent many years behind bars. Her parents disowned her, and even if she were to be released, she would have no family to turn to. Her life would be a thorny path until the end. My brother divorced her, and their child was placed in an institution. Just as my mother had written in her letters, Amy had been unfaithful, and a DNA test revealed that the child wasn't my brother's. I later heard that Amy's parents took in the child and were caring for them. When things had settled down, I returned to the family home to continue organizing it. While doing so, I spoke with my brother.
I was so focused on work that I didn't see her true nature. I couldn't protect Mom.
My brother lamented. I gently patted his shoulder and said, but through Emma, we were able to uncover the truth. I'm sure Mom is at peace now. As my brother looked up, Emma suddenly asked, Is Grandma still here?
No, she's not here anymore.
My daughter replied with a gentle smile.
She smiled at me and then went up to the sky.
I believe that from now on, our mother will watch over us from above. And her love will continue to live on in our hearts forever. How did you like this story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next video.